Hello, everybody. Back from some hockey, of all things, uh, as is somewhat the late October tradition around here. Anyways, so Harris doing this kind of weird thing here, which is a bit weird. Anyways, didn't do a video for UFC 137 because, of course, I let my friend Sonia do a video on my account, and I thought that there was a reasonably large amount of crossover between our videos that there was no point in doing a second one, if that makes any sense. There was some differences. I did pretty well on the card. Lost 3 fights. Went perfect on the main card, which I like. I enjoy that. Although I believe I had Nelson by decision because I did not think he would finish Pro Cup. That would be my mistake. Anyways. But the fight kind of went like I thought it would. Starting from the bottom, working my way up. Facebook prelims. Not a good bunch of cards. Not a good bunch of fights. We opened up with Dustin Jacoby versus Clifford Starks. I took Jacoby because I thought Starks' short notice, apparently about 5 days notice, would, not translate very well into a good fight. I also thought Jacoby would have the defensive wrestling to deal with him, but this fight kind of does what so often seems to be the case, that good offensive wrestling doesn't necessarily equal good defensive wrestling, and vice versa. And Starks came out there, took him down pretty easily, won the fight. Jacoby, I don't care what he does. Starks, I gotta respect the man for taking the fight on short notice and everything. Maybe give him the Brad Tavares fight. Excuse me. Brad Tavares fight, because that's the man he replaced on such short notice. Next up, Chris Camozzi versus Francis Carmo. Another wrong fight for me. I had Camozzi probably winning, but Carmo kind of showing that just superior athletic ability, superior explosiveness, and so on can win you a fight. He needs to clown people less, because when Anderson Silva does it, there's a certain level of he's earned it. With Carmo, not really at all. Next for Carmo, let's throw him in there with Kyle Noke. He's Kyle Noke's guy who also beat Chris Camozzi. And, that's their two kind of biggest UFC wins anyways. And they can fight each other to move on. Camozzi just doesn't seem to have the athletic ability to compete in the 185 division. He's not that big as well at 185. He probably gets cut after this fight just because he's not the type of guy that is the type of guy that the UFC gives a third shot to. You know what I mean? Moving on, Ramsey Najem, Danny Downs. Talk about a guy who has lackluster athletic ability. Danny Downs is right next to that in the dictionary. Danny Downs just out-wrestled, out-grappled, outstruck by Najem, which is not good when you're fighting Ramsey Najem, who's a good fighter, a good 155 prospect, but not that good of a fighter, if you know what I mean, particularly with the stand-up. Yeah. Please, let's not have Danny Downs fight again. Please. He's a tough kid. He's got heart, but he doesn't have a lot of skill or a lot of athletic ability. And it's time to get him out of there, to be honest. I'm being a little harsh on the guy, but after watching that fight, I'm just seldom do you see a guy that outclassed. Is just all I'm saying. Next for Ramsey, it's not really a guy who really stands out, but definitely a step up in competition is needed. Perhaps you could look into guys like Gleason Tibau. Let's go with that. Let's go with Gleason Tibau versus Ramsey Najem and see what happens with that fight. Brandon Vera, Elliot Marshall. Brandon Vera, for the first 2 rounds, fought like I thought he would. Cautious, throwing a number of kicks, taking down Elliot Marshall periodically, just kind of, doing enough to win the rounds, but not doing enough to, win over fans, if you know what I mean. Elliot Marshall clipped him in the 2nd round, had him rocked, almost finished him with an armbar, apparently broke his arm. Definitely the most dominant round of the fight, I suppose, is what I'm looking for. But people have been somewhat disputing this decision, and it's like, you like it or not, I don't think Marshall did enough to get a 10-8 round in the 3rd. It's hard to get a 10-8 round in the 10-8 round in the UFC. And under the rules currently established for scoring in the UFC, Brandon Vera won the first 2 rounds. And that's all that can be said. And that's going to come up later because there were a couple of disputed decisions that I thought were good calls and that people are complaining about. So we'll get to those as they come up. What's next for these two? Cut them both. Marshall for sure. Brandon Vera, I'm sorry. You don't have a killer instinct. And you don't. And your style requires it. You're not a John Fitch who can control fights and win decisions and, be a top fighter, albeit a boring one, but a top fighter. Brandon Vera doesn't have the style to do that. He's been clipped a number of times now that without that killer instinct, he needs to go out and basically figure out what's wrong with himself. And that's all there is to it. And he probably needs to be cut. On to the prelim card on Spike. Bart Palashevsky. I had Tyson Griffin, unfortunately, by unanimous decision. Should have changed that when he came in and weighed overweight, and he looked a bit sluggish. He looked not so good. Palashevsky catching him and then finishing him with the knockout of the night. The only knockout of the night. But hey, award for Bartimus. I'm always good with that. Bartimus is an exciting fighter. I like to see what he can do. 145, I think, is a better home for him. He looked like he did okay making the weight. We haven't seen him in a long fight yet or a high-paced fight yet, so we don't know. But he looks like he can cut the weight. Maybe he can finally fix what has been the biggest problem in his game, and that is his complete lack of a sprawl, it seems, at 155. It seemed like anyone with remotely decent wrestling could take him down at 155. He's got a good game off his back, but it's still a weakness that he needs to address. And if he can address that 145, he's got good stand-up. He's got good offensive wrestling. That's another one. Like, again, good offensive wrestling, not great defensive wrestling. But I'm running a bit over time, I think, for these, so I'm going to push onwards here. Bart Palashevsky versus anyone, honestly, can be a pretty decent fight. So there's not a big deal there. Dennis Seaver, Donald Cerrone. Donald Cerrone just destroyed Dennis Seaver. He let him up on the feet. He eventually got his back and choked him out. What's next for Cerrone? We were talking about this, despite the fact that he's not really on the same kind of role, but Cerrone versus Pettis. Tell me you wouldn't want to see that fight. And that's all there is to it. What Seaver, someone lower, obviously. I don't really like to give predictions for the losers so much because it involves thinking about a lot about who doesn't have a fight already lined up. And that could take too long. Hatsuhikoki George Roop opened up the main card. People complaining about this decision too. I thought under UFC rules, Hioki won the first and second round. The first round is somewhat debatable. Yes, he got outstruck on the feet, but Roop didn't land. A lot of those shots didn't really land clean for Roop, and that's a point I'm going to make. And he got on top. He got dominant position. No, he didn't end the fight. No, he didn't have a ton of offense, but we're talking about the UFC scoring system. And if you have debates with that, that's fine because it's horrendously imperfect. But using it and applying it to the fight is the only way to get a proper decision because you tell the fighters we're going to score based on this, etc., or whatever. This is the criteria that we're going to score the fight on. You have to score the fight on that criteria. And under that criteria, I think Hioki won. It definitely wasn't the debut he needed. I was hoping he would go in there and run through him, and then we could move him to a top-notch 45er. Problem is, despite his statement that Japanese MMA is not dead, Japanese fighters need to start incorporating new training techniques. For one thing, they don't cut a lot of weight. For another thing, they don't seem to have the same kind of strength and conditioning regime that American fighters and Canadian fighters and British fighters are kind of getting there use. And that's a huge deal that they really need to think about. Hioki personally also needs to work on much better boxing. His boxing defense is okay, but his offensive boxing is pretty limited. And it was pretty ineffective against Roop. Which is not to say much, because Roop's ridiculous reach does make it very hard to strike with him. But it still is a thing that, he has to work on if he's going to be an actual contender. I think he has the physical talent to do it. So we'll see. He definitely has the ground game. He is great at taking him out, great at getting past guard. He has a great clinch takedowns, although a pretty poor shot. That's another thing you could work on. But yeah, who's next for Hioki? It's a tough call. Definitely someone higher on the food chain than Roop, but exactly how much higher is a bit of a harder call. I just don't know. There's no one that really comes to mind that Hioki really needs to fight next. Scott Jorgensen, Jeff Curran. Good job by Jorgensen. Good job by Curran. Curran showed again, though, his takedown defense is a tad bit suspect against really good wrestlers. And I mean, that's not a knock on the man, but the problem is that 135 does have a lot of high-end food chain wrestlers like Jorgensen who are going to be able to exploit that. On the feet, I thought Curran was the slightly better, but the stand-up was good. The ground game was also good. Jorgensen showed good defensive BJJ. Curran had a couple of attempts. Had a reasonably nice guillotine attempt, which Jorgensen kind of just rolled through. That was probably the highlight of the fight. But what's next for Jorgensen? Definitely something that moves him close to a title shot, and that's kind of all there is to it. You got, I mean, and it doesn't particularly matter who Jorgensen fights, just as long as it's someone who moves him towards a title shot. He had his title shot, I know, but it has to be said, I mean, he's beaten guys like Kern and Pickett Banuelos now, Takeo Mizugaki. I mean, it's getting hard for him to justify him not being in the title picture. And maybe give him Barao if Renan Barao beats Pickett. That could be interesting. That could be interesting. Unless you're going to use that as a #1 contenders match to give Barao a title shot. You could do a rematch with Pickett and Jorgensen too. That would be interesting as well. So there's a number of open doors for him. Crow Cop, Roy Nelson. Roy Nelson looked better, cardio-wise, physically speaking. He still isn't an elite level heavyweight, and that's kind of all it is. He did the call out for the title shot and whatever. But he did what seems to be the case to do, and that is finishing Crow Cop in the 3rd round. Crow Cop probably retiring. Really probably should have retired a little earlier than this. There's just not a lot of interest in his chin. Isn't at the level it needs to be to fight strikers, and his takedown defense seems to be gone as well. So there's not really a lot of interesting fights for him. Nelson, do a rematch with Schaub. Maybe you can rebuild Schaub. I don't know. Czech Congo, Mitrione, another complaint about decision. I thought Congo won the 1st and the 3rd round. I don't think the 3rd round is debatable. People are saying, well, he didn't really do anything in the 1st round. Neither did Mitrione. Mitrione threw a lot of fakes. Didn't really do anything. And Congo had, as much as, pushing a guy against the cage should not win you a round, if it's the only thing that happens in the round, it does win you the round. And that's all there is to it. What's next for Congo? Don't really care. Maybe a rematch with Travis Brown, just because of the, the draw nature of their previous fight. Then we had the main event, BJ Penn, Nick Diaz. I don't have a lot of time to talk about this fight, but I'll try to summarize it. Basically, Penn wins the 1st round. Diaz out-cardios him for the 2nd and 3rd round. And it's not that, he only won the fight after Penn gassed, because he made Penn gas. He forced a pace on Penn that Penn couldn't keep up with. And then talked mad smack about GSP. Just a quick thought on that, though. It has to be said that when beating BJ Penn is a great achievement, but BJ Penn, compared to a lot of other top 170ers and top fighters in general, does not have good cardio. And that's a primary weapon of Diaz's that I'm not sure is going to apply in other fights. It's an interesting fight, and people are also going to say, well, he stopped Penn's takedowns as well. Penn's takedowns when he's gassed are not very good, and his offensive wrestling's never been that great. It's been more that he's a great defensive wrestler, not offensive wrestler. They don't necessarily go hand in hand. Anyways, Penn thinking of retiring. He could. He's got a lot of money. He doesn't have to fight if he doesn't want to, and that's it. Doesn't seem to have the drive for it. Leave comments and so on. And I'm out because I got about 15 seconds to go.